Flanking in Valorant is one of the most powerful things that you can do in order to secure multiple kills and carry your team. However, if done incorrectly, it could cost you your life and allow your enemy that opportunity they need in order to clutch up a round. All that being said, in this video, we're going to run through 5 big tips and 5 big mistakes involving flanking so that you know exactly how to get value out of it each and every time. Flank on over to the subscribe button right now and smash it so you don't miss out on any future guides. But enough talking, let's just jump right into it, shall we? Kicking it right off, starting with the tips, the first tip that we have for you is use your flanking to control rotation. Now, there's a few things I need to clarify. So instead of just full flanking the enemy, which means that you route all the way from where you're at to the back of the enemy and you start attacking them or you push them, push a flank slowly and take position between them and their rotation route. Essentially what you're doing here is you're putting yourself in a better position to make an impactful flank if they engage your team, but you're also in a location that if the enemy team decide to rotate from default, you can hear them, you can catch them off guard and punish them, or at the very least, you can gather information for your team. This is a pretty effective strategy if the enemy is playing default for a large amount of time. I'm going to break this concept more down later when I talk about the mistakes, but for now, understand that flanks don't always have to be just going behind the enemy and engaging them right away. Now, the second big tip that we have for you is do not hard flank if you don't have full confirmation that all enemies are on the site, the other site. Otherwise, you might be flanking too soon or you'll be walking right into an enemy trap. If you do want to flank, however, a slower flank where you check multiple angles that enemies are hiding can still be powerful, but you have to be careful because, like I said, enemies could be waiting around any corner. Now, what you don't want to be doing is using utility around every single corner because then the element of surprise is lost. What you want to be doing is you want to just be slow peeking every single corner you can if you don't have full confirmation and saving your utility because that element of surprise is extremely important. This is why using a phantom in general is actually better for flanking than the vandal because you could pre-fire a lot of corners without alerting the enemy of your presence. Now, moving on to the third tip that we have for you, you need to be thinking about where your teammates are and what their line of sight is. You can see it on the top left minimap. Now, the reason that you do this is you think about where is an enemy most likely to be. Flanking, like I said before, can essentially squeeze an enemy's possible position and allow you to gather a more accurate picture of where they're located, because if they're not coming to your site and they haven't crossed through one of your allies' sight lines, as you push forward, you can get a better picture about exactly where they are and where you could potentially make a flash play or something like that on them. Now, the fourth tip that we have for you is keep track of time. As the clock ticks down, the amount of plays that an enemy can do is less and less. For example, with only 35 seconds on the clock, the enemies will either be forced to commit, they can't play default for any longer, they're either forced to commit to the point that they're at, or they're going to be forced to fast rotate. Now, if you're on a flank and you're playing that middle of the ground place that we talked about before, where you're essentially waiting for them in rotation, you're not full committing to them yet. If they fast rotate, they don't have enough time to clear out every angle and they'll be running, so you will know exactly where they are. That can give you an opportunity to easily turn the tables on them or punish them if they're not expecting it. Now, in a certain time frame, realize that they can no longer rotate off the point and they will be committing to that site, and at that point you need to push up a lot more, because for the fifth tip, if your team is actively engaging the enemy, you need to be swinging the enemy as well, especially if your allies are in an actual gunfight. Basically, what you're doing is you're not baiting your allies and you're incorporating the same counter swing method that you would be if you're playing with your team, but you have a crossfire advantage. So essentially, the two possible scenarios that you want to happen is either one, you engage with a flank when the enemies are not prepared for it and you get people off guard and you get kills, or two, you engage on the flank even if maybe they know you're there, but you do it at the exact same time at the players on the point are engaging the enemy. So you create that crossfire and you basically trade out with kills, but you have that crossfire advantage. Now we're about to move on to the top 5 biggest mistakes that's messing up your flanks, but before we do that, smash that like button. Please do me a huge favor, but let's jump right into it. So for the first big mistake, this is an extremely huge mistake, and it's flanking too early. Enemies will often be playing default, and a lot of times they will spread out before they commit to a site. You should not be flanking right off the bat, especially if you get no confirmation that a full enemy is on a site. Often you'll see allies say, everyone's pushing in on this site, but unless you get actual full confirmation that there's 5 people pushing that site, then you could easily be walking into a trap, because often multiple players will be playing default and some of them will see an opportunity and get aggressive, but the enemies haven't rotated off your side's default. So definitely keep that in mind and do not flank too early unless you get full 5-man confirmation. Now, the second biggest mistake that happens is the inverse of that, and it's flanking too late. If you see visible confirmation that 5 players are pushing onto a site in the top left minimap, do not slow push a flank. You should be pushing it incredibly fast. If your timing is too far off and the enemy team kills multiple members of your team and they get bombed down before you make the flank, then it's going to be very difficult for you to make a play and you're going to have poor positioning. Now, some amount of that is on your teammates to make sure that they don't die right off the bat if the enemy pushes in and they use utility to stall. But keep in mind that your allies only have so much utility and so much potential stall that if you don't time your flanks at the correct time, you're not going to be able to punish enemies or get there in time to actually confirm some kill. For these reasons, it's actually a lot easier and typically better to flank if one of your allies is someone like a Sage on the other side, because that person has all the abilities that they want to bait out and that can really gum up default, which is perfect, gives you a perfect opportunity to actually push the enemy because they're usually going to be trapped in default, and that is the perfect time where you can actually get some flank value. Now, the third big mistake when it comes to flanking is flanking too much. You have all had this person in your games that just flanks every time and gets dinked right off the bat, gives the enemy an opportunity to push up the point. So flanking should be a mix-up, not a predominant strategy. The problem with flanking is that if you flank non-stop, it is incredibly easy to counter because enemies can bait you and wait for you, and you can't really peek out or check every single corner. So do not flank every single time. Do not make it a habit that the enemies can pick up on. The key to flanking is being sporadic, and the thing I would suggest for you is do not flank from the same place every time. Maybe if you're playing the map Bind, for example, maybe one time flank out of hookah, maybe the other time flank out of showers. Mix it up and don't just flank every single time in the same way, and definitely don't flank every single round. Some rounds you should and some rounds you should not. Now, moving on to the fourth big mistake that is probably messing up your flanks is people keep flanking on characters that don't have tools that help them flank. You should almost never be flanking on characters like Sage, Brimstone, or just in general with characters that don't have tools to help them execute flanks. Examples of some really good flankers are Phoenix, Omen, Reyna, etc. But essentially, you want to be playing a character that will have tools that can help you follow up on kills on the flank and actually capitalize on catching enemies in large groups off guard. Now, the fifth and final mistake that is definitely messing up your flanks over and over again is not timing your flank engagements with your team fights. I talked about this a little bit, but this is perhaps the most important and biggest mistake that players are making consistently. You need to be engaging the enemy on your flanks at the exact same time that enemies are either in the transition to go into the point and they're not paying attention to their flank, or there is an ongoing team fight where they're not paying attention to their flank as well. The best way to do this is actually trying to comment and say, hey, don't engage the enemy, I'm about to be on the flank, and then at the same time, you push forward. This is going to be even better in a duo, but if you hear gunfire and you hear abilities being used, that is usually the go-ahead to go on a flank. You see, it can be a really big liability for the enemy team to just permanently watch the flank forever. Like, they can't just keep watching it and watching it and watching it, especially when it's their job to counter-swing people or secure sightlines on the actual site that they're pushing. So in those windows, when it actually costs them a lot in order to just keep staring at the flank, that is the time that you need to flank. And those are the examples that I gave. And if you get this right, you're going to get way more value on your flanks on average. And if you follow everything in this video, a lot more of your flanks are going to be successful in general. Speaking of successful, if you want to be successful in Valorant, smash that sub button so you don't miss out on a single in-depth guide or video. But that's all we got for you today. See you next time.